My name is Amanda Dorsey. I'm 36 years old. 2 weeks ago, my brother introduced me to his fiancée and her family. He put his arm around my shoulder and smiled for the room. "This is my sister," he said. "Uneducated, a failure, no future." 60 people laughed. My mother laughed the loudest. I didn't defend myself. I didn't cry. I didn't leave. I stood there and held my glass, because 3 tables away an old man was setting down his fork. He was standing up. I had seen his face before, under very different lights. He took the microphone from the band. He looked at me. Not at my brother. At me. "Forgive me," he said. "I'm surprised to see you here. A shame I didn't recognize you sooner." My brother went pale. He had no idea who that man was to me. Neither did anyone else in that room. "Before I take you back, if your chest is already tight from that, do me a small favor. Like this video and subscribe, so stories like mine reach the people who need them. And tell me in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is there. I read every one. I'm Amanda. This is the story of the night the lie my family built for 18 years finally ran out of room. Let's go back to where it started. These days my life fits in a few quiet rooms, a locker with my name on a piece of tape, a pager that goes off at hours that don't belong to normal people, a 1-bedroom apartment in Brookline with a coffee maker I bought used, and a window that looks at another window. I'm not married. I don't have children. I have a job that most people will never understand, and I made my peace with that a long time ago. I'm a cardiothoracic surgeon. I operate on hearts. I have done it, as the attending, the one whose name goes on the chart, for 3 years now. Before that, there were 13 years of training. College, medical school, 5 years of general surgery, 2 more learning to hold a beating heart still enough to fix it. I counted those years the way some people count rosary beads, one at a time, on purpose. Nobody in my family knows any of this. That sentence sounds impossible when I say it out loud. We live in a world of search bars and social media. You'd think they'd have stumbled across me, but they never looked. That's the part people don't believe. They didn't look because they didn't want to. The story they had was easier. In their version, I dropped out of nursing school at 19, embarrassed everyone, and ran off to who knows where. In their version, I was the cautionary tale. The one you mention at dinner to make the well-behaved children sit up straighter. My mother repeated it so many times it became furniture in her house. You don't question the furniture, so I let them keep it. I told myself that was strength. Some days I still think it was. Then, in September, my phone rang. The number wasn't saved, but I knew the area code. Nathaniel, my brother. 3 years older, and the brightest thing in my mother's sky since the day he was born. "Mandy," he said, like no time had passed. "It's Nate." He only ever called me Mandy when he wanted something. He told me he was engaged. Her name was Priscilla. "Good family," he said. "The kind of family that mattered." There was a party, an engagement party, 2 weeks out, on the North Shore. And then he said the thing that made me sit down on the edge of my bed. "Mom really wants you there." I waited. There's a trick I learned in operating rooms. When something doesn't make sense, you don't move. You wait until it does. "She wants the whole family in one place," he went on. "For once, you don't have to say anything. Just come, show your face. It would mean a lot to her." I should have heard it then. The way you don't invite someone to mean a lot to a mother who calls you a failure for sport. You invite them to be a prop, a before picture, proof of how far the favored child has climbed. But I'm going to be honest with you because there's no point telling this story if I lie in it. A part of me, the small, stubborn 8-year-old part that never fully died, wanted to go. wanted my mother to see me in a good dress, standing up straight, alive and fine and more than fine. Wanted, after 18 years, to be looked at and not flinched away from. So I said yes. I wrote the date on the calendar on my fridge. I didn't write what I did for a living next to my own name. I didn't think I'd need to. Great, Nathaniel said. It's at the Easton's place, you'll see. These are real people, Mandy. Real people. As opposed to me. I didn't tell anyone at the hospital that I was going. Not Bridget, not the residents who follow me around like ducklings, not the one friend I have outside of medicine. I'm not sure why. Maybe because saying it out loud, I'm going home to see the family that threw me away, would have made it real enough to talk me out of. For 2 weeks I went to work and came home and looked at the date on the fridge calendar like it was a lab result I was afraid to open. I rehearsed in the car, not speeches, just postures. How to stand so my shoulders didn't curl in the way they used to in that house. How to answer, "What do you do now?" without apologizing for the answer. One night, prepping for a case, the resident scrubbing in beside me asked if I was all right. I'd been staring at nothing. "Family thing this weekend," I said. "Good family thing or bad family thing?" I thought about it. "Both," I said. "We'll see which one wins." I told myself it was just dinner. To understand why a grown woman would walk back into a room like that, you have to understand the room she grew up in. I was the second child and the first disappointment. That's not me being dramatic. That's the family's own framing, repeated until I half believed it. Nathaniel came first, and Nathaniel came golden. He smiled early. He charmed teachers. He could walk into a parent-teacher conference that should have ended his life and walk out with everyone laughing. My mother looked at him the way some people look at a sunrise. She looked at me the way you look at weather you didn't plan for. I want to be fair to her, even now. Coralie Dorsey wasn't a monster in a movie. She made school lunches. She came to my one piano recital and clapped. But there was a thumb on the scale of our house, and the thumb was always pressing down on my side. If Nathaniel broke something, it was an accident. If I broke something, it was a sign of who I was. I learned the rules early, the way children always do. When I was 9, I won a regional science fair. A small thing, a ribbon, a model of the solar system I'd built out of foam and patience. I brought it home certain, for once, that this would land. My mother looked at the ribbon, then at Nathaniel, who'd gotten a B- on something that week, and she said, "Don't make a big deal of it. Your brother's sensitive about school." The ribbon went in a drawer. I learned that my wins were inconvenient. They made the wrong child feel bad. So I stopped bringing things home. That's a thing nobody tells you about being the unfavored child. You don't just stop getting praise. You start hiding the things that might earn it, because you've learned they cost more than they're worth. The worst of it had a date. I was 14. It was a Saturday in spring. My father had a coin collection, silver dollars mostly, the only thing of value he'd inherited from his own father. He kept it in a wooden case in the den, and we were both forbidden to touch it. That spring, 3 of the rarest coins went missing. I didn't take them. I didn't know who did. But Nathaniel, 17 and already in trouble at school, walked into the kitchen that night with a face I will never forget. Calm, helpful, sad. "I saw Mandy in the den," he said. "By the case. She told me not to tell." I remember the silence. I remember my mother turning to me, and the thing in her eyes was not surprise. It was confirmation. As if she'd been waiting years for the proof that I was who she suspected. "I didn't," I said. "Nathaniel, you know I didn't." "Why would your brother lie?" my mother said. "That was the whole trial. That was the verdict and the sentence. Why would your brother lie?" The question wasn't a question. It was a wall. My father said very little. He sold the rest of the collection within the year, and he never looked at the empty space on the shelf, and he never looked quite the same at me, either. He died when I was 22, and we hadn't spoken in 2 years. I found out at his funeral that the coins had turned up, in a pawn shop, under a name I recognized. By then it didn't matter. By then the story was set in concrete. I went to that funeral, by the way. I want you to know that. I drove all night to get there, and I stood at the back of the church in a borrowed black coat, and not one person in my family spoke to me. My mother saw me across the grave and turned her shoulder. Nathaniel gave a eulogy about what a close family we'd always been. I left before the reception. I'd driven 9 hours to be a ghost at my own father's burial, and on the drive back I made myself a promise. Never again would I show up somewhere to be treated like I didn't exist. I broke that promise 18 years later, for a party on the North Shore. I'll get to that. After that spring with the coins, I became the thing they'd decided I was. Not because I did anything, because there's no point defending yourself in a house where your defense is itself the crime. Talk back, and you're difficult. Stay quiet, and you're hiding something. Cry, and you're manipulative. There is no move on that board that wins. So I stopped playing. I went silent. I learned to fold myself small. People who study these things have a name for it now. The fawn response, the way a child learns to disappear to stay safe. I didn't have the word then. I just had the instinct. Don't take up space. Don't need anything. Don't give them a target. The lie about me grew the way lies do, by being useful. I was the reason for every family disappointment. The relative who didn't show up to Christmas. The black mark. The disappointment. The proof that some kids just turn out wrong. By the time I was 18, I had stopped expecting anything else. I worked 2 jobs through high school, hid the money in a shoebox, and on the morning after my graduation, which only my aunt attended, I packed 1 bag and got on a bus. My mother's last words to me at the door were not goodbye. "You'll be back," she said. "People like you always come back." I never went back. And I let them keep the story. Every version of it. That was the mistake that took me 18 years to understand. By staying gone and staying silent, I didn't just protect myself. I left them a blank page and they filled it however they liked. The bus took me to a city where no one knew the Dorsey family verdict. The first years were hard in a way I won't dress up for you. I slept on a friend's floor, then in a rented room with a shared bathroom. I worked the closing shift at a diner and the opening shift at a copy center, and I went to community college in the gap between. I was tired in a way that lives in your bones, but I was tired on my own terms, and that turned out to be a different kind of tired entirely. Somewhere in that exhaustion, I found the thing that saved me. I'd taken a biology class to fill a requirement. The professor put a diagram of the human heart on the screen. The 4 chambers, the valves, the way the whole thing is just a muscle that decides 60 times a minute to keep you alive. I sat in the back of that room and felt something I hadn't felt in years. Not hope, exactly. Direction. I wanted to know how it worked. Then I wanted to know how it broke. Then I wanted to know how to fix it. It sounds simple, said fast like that. It was not simple. Pre-med while working full-time is a thing people warn you against. I did it anyway, because the alternative was going back to being nobody's, and I would rather have died than go back. I didn't call home. Not once. The first year, I waited for the phone to ring. It didn't. The second year, I stopped waiting. By the third, I had taught myself not to do the math on holidays. Not to think, they're sitting down to dinner right now, and no one has set a place for me, and no one has noticed. There's no place to set. There were nights I almost called. I won't pretend there weren't. The worst was a December when I had the flu and a fever and no one to bring me soup, and I sat on the floor of that shared bathroom with my phone in my hand and my mother's number on the screen. My thumb hovered over it for a long time. Then I remembered the door, and people like you always come back. And I put the phone down. Getting sick alone is bad. Getting sick alone and then being told you deserved it is worse. I'd had enough of the second kind. There was no Facebook for me, no public trail with my face on it. Not because I was hiding, because I was busy, and because the people who would have searched had no interest in searching. I existed entirely outside the story they were telling about me, and the story never came looking. Medical school came on a scholarship and a mountain of loans. Then residency, where they break you down to see what you're made of, and where I discovered I was made of something harder than anyone back home would have guessed. I was good with my hands. I was calm when other people panicked. The first time I held pressure on a bleeding artery while the room around me sped up, I felt my own pulse slow down. There's a strange gift hidden in a childhood like mine, and I only found it in that hospital. When you grow up never knowing which version of your mother is going to walk through the door, you become an expert at staying calm in chaos. You learn to read a room in half a second. You learn that the worst thing isn't the emergency. It's freezing during it. By the time I got to a trauma bay, I'd been training for it my whole life. The thing they'd called my coldness, my distance, my failure to react, it turned out to be exactly the temperament you want in the person holding the scalpel. A senior surgeon pulled me aside one night after a long case. Gruff man, not given to compliments. "You don't flinch," he said. "Most people flinch. Where'd you learn that?" I almost laughed. I learned it at a kitchen table in spring, I wanted to say. I learned it the day I figured out that flinching just tells them where to aim. "I don't know," I told him. "I just don't. I chose the heart. Of all the things to choose, I chose the organ that everyone uses as a metaphor for love. There's a joke in there I've never been able to land." By the time I finished my fellowship, I was 33. An attending. The one who decides. I had a parking spot with my name on it and a title in front of that name that had taken me half my life to earn. Dr. Dorsey. The first time a nurse said it to my face, "Dr. Dorsey, your patient's prepped." I had to step into a supply closet for a minute. Not to cry. Just to stand in the dark and let the name settle onto me like it belonged there. I had built a whole self out of the wreckage they left me. I thought the building was finished. Then, on a fall night 2 years ago, they wheeled in a man whose chart said Easton. He came in through the emergency department a little after midnight. 76 years old. Crushing chest pain that had started at dinner and gotten worse on the drive in. By the time I saw him, the cardiology team had run their tests, and the picture was bad. Multiple coronary arteries blocked. The kind of disease that doesn't get fixed with a stent or a pill. The kind that needs an open chest and a bypass, and needs it soon. His name was Walter Easton. I want to be clear about something, because it matters to everything that came after. The name meant nothing to me. Easton is not a rare name. I had never heard of my future sister-in-law. My brother was not engaged. There was no party on a calendar. He was a patient, one of hundreds. A heart I needed to fix before it stopped on its own. I went to see him before the surgery, the way I always do. Some surgeons skip it. I never do. You're about to open a person's chest. The least you can do is learn their face while it's still talking to you. He was sitting up despite everything, and he had the bright, stubborn eyes of a man who had spent his life being listened to. There was a paperback on his tray table, dog-eared at the middle, like he fully intended to finish it. I liked him immediately. You're not supposed to have favorites. You have them anyway. They tell me you're the one who's going to fix me, he said. That's the plan. You look young for it. I get that a lot. My late wife was a nurse, he said. 40 years. She used to say the good ones are calm, and the great ones are calm, and a little stubborn. He looked at me. Which are you? Stubborn, I said. Ask anyone. He laughed, then winced, because laughing hurt. Then he studied me for a second, and the humor went out of his face, and what was left was something plainer. He pressed his hand flat against the center of his own chest, over the trouble, and he said something I have thought about more times than I can count. "Whatever's in there that's broken," he said, "I trust you with it. I don't know you, but I trust you." I have had patients beg me. I have had patients deny they were sick at all. I had never had one hand me his fear so plainly and ask for nothing back but the work. "I'll take care of it," I said. The surgery was a triple bypass. It took most of the night. I won't walk you through the technical parts. You didn't come here for a lecture on grafts. I'll tell you that there was a moment, about 4 hours in, when his heart didn't want to start again after we'd done the repair. There's a stretch of seconds in that situation that feels like a year. The room goes very quiet and very loud at the same time. His heart caught. It found its rhythm. It kept going. There was a nurse with me through all of it, Bridget Callahan, who has scrubbed in on more of my cases than I can count, and who has a memory like a steel trap. When his heart restarted, she said, under her mask, just to me, "Welcome back, Mr. Easton." He recovered well. Old men like Walter Easton are tougher than they look. I saw him every day on rounds for a week. He asked me questions about the operation that were sharper than some I get from medical students. He told me about his late wife, about the shipping business he'd built and sold, about a granddaughter he adored. "She's getting to the age where everyone asks when she's settling down," he told me on the 4th day, working his way through a cup of gelatin he clearly resented. "I tell them to leave her be. The right one shows up or he doesn't. You can't rush a thing like that." "Sounds like good advice," I said, half listening, already thinking about the patient in the next bed. "It's terrible advice," he said cheerfully. "But it's mine." I half listened the way you do, warmly, but with one foot already in the next room. I didn't write down a word he said about his granddaughter. Why would I? I didn't know her name was Priscilla. I didn't know that in 2 years she would stand in a room and announce she was marrying a man named Dorsey. The information that would have changed everything walked right past me, and I let it, because to me, he was simply a good outcome on a hard case. On the day I discharged him, he reached up from the wheelchair and took my hand in both of his. "You gave me back time," he said. "I don't know what I did to earn it, but I won't waste it." I signed the discharge papers. Easton, Walter. I closed the chart. I moved on to the next heart. I never connected the name to anything. Why would I? My family and I had not spoken in 16 years. The man rolling out of my hospital was a stranger I had saved, and I expected, the way you expect a sunset, that I would never see him again. I was wrong about that. I was wrong about almost everything I thought was settled. After Nathaniel's call, something I hadn't expected started happening. I started remembering. Not the surgery. That came later. I started remembering the family. Old wounds I'd taped over reopened the way they do when you're about to see the people who made them. And because I'm a person who needs to understand things, I did something I had never let myself do. I went looking. I'm not proud of it, and I'm not ashamed of it. I wanted to walk into that party knowing more than they thought I knew. So I reached out to one person from the old life, a cousin, Janelle, who'd always been kind to me in the small ways kids are kind when they can't change anything. We'd traded a few messages over the years. I called her. "Amanda," she said, and I could hear her sit down. "I can't believe you're going to this thing." "Why not?" "Because of how he talks about you." "Still." I asked her what she meant. She got quiet. The kind of quiet that means a person is deciding whether to hand you something heavy. "Amanda," she said finally, "do you actually know what happened with Nate? Back then?" "He stole Dad's coins and blamed me," I said. "I figured that out a long time ago." "Not the coins." A pause. "The school." I switched the phone to my other ear and sat down at my kitchen table. Outside, The city was doing its evening thing, sirens and buses, the ordinary noise of a life I'd built by hand. "What school?" I said. "You don't know." It wasn't a question, I could hear her doing the math. 18 years, no contact, a whole family conversation I'd never been in the room for. "Oh, Amanda, you've been gone so long you don't even know the shape of the lie." "Then tell me the shape of it." Here's the version I'd lived inside for 18 years. I dropped out of nursing school in disgrace, ran away, and disappeared. I had never been to nursing school. I knew that. But I'd assumed the lie was just a vague smear, that they'd swapped the real story, whatever it was, for an uglier one. A child runs off. The family invents a reason. The reason is unflattering. Standard cruelty. I'd made my peace with the standard kind. What Janelle told me was not the standard kind. It was specific. And it was his. Nathaniel had enrolled in a nursing program the same year I left home. He'd lasted 3 semesters. In the 3rd, he was caught. Not once, but in a pattern. Paying another student to take his exams, and forging a clinical evaluation with an instructor's signature. He wasn't quietly asked to leave. He was expelled, formally, for academic dishonesty. There was a hearing. There was a letter. People knew. And in the same season that the letter went out, a new story arrived in my family's mouth. A story about a Dorsey child who'd flamed out of nursing school in disgrace and run off. Same school, same disgrace, same year. He'd taken his own failure, peeled the name off it, and stuck mine on instead. I sat very still on my used couch with my used coffee maker ticking in the next room, and I felt the floor of my own history tilt. "Everyone believed it," Janelle said. "Your mom backed him. She told the whole family it was you. It was easier. You were already gone. You weren't there to argue." I wasn't there to argue. That was the genius of it, if you can call it that. He didn't even need a good lie. He needed an absent target and a mother who preferred him. He had both. "Didn't anyone ever check?" I asked. Janelle, I'm a surgeon. I've been one for years. My name is on a hospital website. It would take 10 seconds. "Nobody checked because nobody wanted to," she said. "That's the part you have to understand. The story was working for them. It made your mom feel like she'd raised one good kid and one bad one instead of, whatever the truth is, it made Nate the hero. There was a Thanksgiving. Maybe 4 years ago. Somebody mentioned they'd heard you were doing something medical up in Boston, and Nate just laughed and said, 'She's probably scrubbing floors and telling people it's surgery.' You know how she is." And everyone laughed and passed the potatoes. "You know how she is." 4 words to bury a decade of work. "He had to keep you a failure," Janelle said quietly. "Because the second you weren't, people might start asking what really happened at that school." "Why are you telling me now?" I asked. "Because you're walking into a room full of people he's been lying to," she said, "and I think you should know whose failure you've been carrying." I thanked her. I hung up. I sat there for a long time. Here is the thing I want you to understand, because it's the hinge of everything. I did not feel triumphant. I felt the opposite. I felt the cold, clean grief of a person who finally sees the exact shape of the thing that crushed her. For 18 years I had quietly accepted a verdict, not the coins, but the larger verdict, that I was the one who failed, who fell short, who turned out wrong. And the whole time, the failure they were describing wasn't mine. It was his. I had carried his. I didn't decide to expose him. I want to be honest about that too. I'm not a vengeful person. The job beats that out of you, because you spend your life on the losing side of things you can't control. I decided something quieter. I decided I would go to that party as exactly who I was. No costume, no shrinking. If they asked what I did, I would tell them. If they didn't ask, I would not perform smallness to make Nathaniel comfortable. That was the whole plan. Show up as myself, I had no idea that the universe had already loaded the rest. Here's where I want to ask you something, and then I'll go on. By this point, you know there's a man waiting at that party. The one who stood up and took the microphone. You don't know who he is yet. Before I show you, tell me in the comments. Who do you think he turns out to be? Most people guess wrong. Hold your guess. Let's keep going. In the days before the party, I almost called Walter Easton without knowing I was about to. Let me explain that, because it sounds like nonsense, and it isn't. I'd gone back to the hospital, into the rhythm of cases, and one afternoon, Bridget Callahan caught me in the hallway with a paper cup of bad coffee and that look she gets. "You remember the Easton bypass?" she said. "Couple years back. The tough old guy." "Hand on his chest," I said. "Trusted me before he knew me. That's the one." She smiled. "He still sends the unit a card. Every year. Around the date of the surgery." I stopped walking. "A card?" "A real one. Paper. Handwriting like a man who learned penmanship in a different century." She shrugged like it was a small thing. To her it was. "Says the same thing every time. Still spending the time you gave me." "Signs it, Walter." I didn't tell her what that did to me. I'm not a sentimental person on the outside. Bridget knows me well enough to read the long pause, though, and she tilted her head. "You okay, doctor?" "Fine," I said. That's a nice thing. People don't usually." "He's not usual," she said, and went back to her charting. I went and found the card from that year, the most recent one, pinned to the corkboard in the staff lounge where the nurses keep the nice ones. There were a dozen cards up there. Thank yous, a birth announcement, a crayon drawing from a kid who'd had a hole in his heart closed. And there, in the corner, blue ink, steady hand, still spending the time you gave me. Walter. I stood in front of that corkboard longer than I should have. You have to understand what that meant against the backdrop of my life. I had spent 18 years being told in 100 ways that I was worthless, that I had no future, that whatever I touched, I ruined. And here, on a corkboard in a break room, was a man I'd met for 1 week telling me, every single year, that I had given him time, that I had not ruined something, that I had saved it. The people who were supposed to love me had decided I was a failure without evidence. A stranger had decided I was worth a yearly letter. With the best evidence there is, he was still alive to write it. I want to say something here that took me a long time to learn. The people who refuse to see you are not a measure of your worth. They are a measure of their own limits. My mother's inability to see what I'd become was not a verdict on me. It was a verdict on her. It just took a stranger's handwriting to teach me the difference. For most of my life I had it backwards. I thought that if the people who were supposed to love me couldn't see anything good in me, the problem had to be me. That they had information I didn't. Some clear view of my real defect. It's the most natural mistake in the world for a child to make. You assume the people in charge are right. It takes decades to understand that sometimes the people in charge are simply unable to love you, and that their failure has nothing to do with whether you're worth loving. A man whose chest I opened in the dark could see it in a week. The woman who raised me couldn't see it in 36 years. One of them was paying attention. One of them never was. I thought about reaching out to him. I even pulled up the discharge contact in the system, then closed it, because that's not a thing you do. You don't call old patients to feel better about your family. So I let it go. I told myself the card was enough. I told myself I'd carry it into that party like a stone in my pocket. Something to hold when my mother's voice got into my head. I did not, for 1 second, imagine that the hand that wrote that card belonged to the grandfather of the woman my brother was about to marry. I want you to sit with the size of that coincidence, because I've had 2 years to sit with it, and it still stops my breath. Boston is a big city with a famous hospital. Hundreds of cardiac patients come through those doors. The North Shore has 100 families with money and good names. There was no reason on earth for those 2 lines. The patient who blessed me and the family who'd helped my brother bury me, to be the same line. But the heart I'd restarted that night belonged to Walter Easton. And Walter Easton's granddaughter, Priscilla, was going to stand up in front of 60 people and announce she was marrying Nathaniel Dorsey. And the family would all be there. The whole family. The grandfather at the head table, because that's where you put the patriarch. The man whose chest I had opened was going to be in the same room as the brother who called me uneducated. I didn't know any of that as I drove north that Saturday. I knew I had a card's worth of proof, somewhere in the world, that I'd done one good thing. I didn't know I was driving straight toward the hand that wrote it. The Easton's place was the kind of house that doesn't have an address so much as a reputation. Stone gateposts at the end of a long private drive, the harbor flat and silver behind it. The sort of old New England money that doesn't shout, because it's never had to. I almost missed the name on the gate. I was rehearsing, in my head, how to stand. Then my headlights caught the bronze letters set into the left post. Easton. I slowed the car to a crawl. Something turned over in the back of my mind, the way a name does when it's filed somewhere you can't reach. Easton. I knew an Easton. I'd known an Easton. The feeling was strong enough that I sat at the gate with my foot on the brake for a few seconds trying to place it. Then I did what tired, anxious people do. I talked myself out of it. There are Eastons all over the North Shore, I told myself. It's practically a regional surname. You're nervous and your brain is grabbing at anything. Park the car. Go inside. Survive the evening. Drive home. I parked. I went inside. I want to tell you about the 30 seconds between the car and the front door, because I've replayed them more than almost anything else. I stood on that gravel in the cold and I felt the old gravity of family pull at me. 18 years of distance, and one driveway was enough to make my body remember how to be the girl who folded herself small. My shoulders started to curl. I caught them. I straightened. I thought about the card in my coat pocket. I'd actually brought a copy of it, folded in my breast pocket like a talisman, and I made myself a deal. Whatever happens in there, you don't disappear. You can leave. You can stay quiet. But you don't disappear. Then I walked in. The party was already loud and bright. A band in the corner. 60 people, give or take, in the kind of clothes that cost more than my first car. Waiters with trays. A long head table at the far end of the room, the way you'd arrange a wedding, with the most important people seated facing the rest. I found my brother first, because you always find the threat first. Nathaniel looked wonderful. I'll give him that. He looked like the story he'd told about himself. Successful, easy, beloved. He had his arm around a woman I assumed was Priscilla, pretty and watchful, with kind eyes that kept checking the room like a host's eyes do. And beside Nathaniel, glowing, was my mother. Coralie Dorsey saw me. For 1/2 second her face did something complicated, then it smoothed into the public version. Amanda, she said, like a woman naming a chore. You came. You wanted the whole family here, I said. I did. She looked me over, the dress, the posture, the lack of apology in my face, and I watched her decide she didn't like it. You look, well, different. I am different. She had a way of making a sound carry a whole verdict. Well, try not to make anything awkward tonight. These are important people. Priscilla's family is... They're somebody, Amanda. Just smile and be pleasant, and let your brother have his night. Let your brother have his night. Even now. Even here. The whole architecture of my childhood in one sentence. Nathaniel turned then, and his smile widened. And I knew, the way Prey knows, that he had been waiting for me. Not dreading me. Waiting. I was a part of the evening he'd planned. There she is, he said warmly to the people nearest us. My sister came all the way up here. He said it like an accomplishment of his own. I made myself breathe. I had a plan. The plan was to be myself, to be still, to not perform smallness. I held to it. I shook Priscilla's hand. She had a good handshake and tired, watchful eyes, and when she said, "I've heard so much about you," I could tell by the careful way she said it that what she'd heard wasn't kind. "All of it bad, I'd guess," I said lightly. She had the grace to look uncomfortable. "I'm sure that's not—" "It's fine," I said. I took a glass of something from a passing tray to give my hands a job. "It usually is." And then, scanning the room the way you do when you're looking for the exits, my eyes went to the head table. An old man sat at the center of it. White hair, bright, stubborn eyes, a hand resting flat on the table in front of him in a gesture I had seen before, over the center of his own chest, that night, in a hospital bed. Walter Easton. The whole room tilted and went very quiet inside my head, even as it stayed loud all around me. I knew then exactly what I'd been driving toward, and I made a decision in that half-second that I'd second-guess for the rest of my life. I decided to say nothing, to let them have their night, to not be the woman who makes a scene at someone else's party. I would protect everyone, the way I always had, by disappearing. That was the plan. Right up until my brother picked up the microphone. Nathaniel tapped a glass with a fork, and the room turned to him. He had the easy confidence of a man who'd never once been doubted in public. "Thank you all for being here," he began. "Especially Priscilla's family, the Eastons." He nodded toward the head table, toward Walter, with a respect so thick you could have spread it on toast. "You've welcomed me like one of your own." Polite warmth from the room. He let it settle, working the crowd the way he'd worked teachers and bosses and everyone else his whole charmed life. "Some of you know my story," he went on. "I built what I have from scratch. No handouts. Nobody opening doors for me." He smiled. Modest. Practiced. "In my family, that kind of drive wasn't always common. I'm the one who took school seriously. I'm the one who made something of himself." A small, knowing laugh from a few tables. My mother's chin lifted. She was watching him the way she'd watched him his whole life, like a sunrise she'd personally arranged. Every word of it was a brick in a wall built on my back. I took school seriously. He was the one expelled. I made something of himself. He'd made something of me. A scapegoat. A cautionary tale. A place to set down his own failure so his hands would be clean. He was doing it again, right now, in real time, and the room was nodding along. "Which brings me to a special guest," Nathaniel said, and his eyes found me, and his smile didn't change, but something underneath it sharpened. "My sister made it tonight, all the way from the city." 60 faces turned toward me. I stood very still and held my glass. I could feel the card folded in my breast pocket, a small square of cardstock against my heart, and I held the deal I'd made on the gravel. "You don't disappear." "Now, I love my sister," he said, in the tone people use right before they don't. "I do. But I want to be honest with the Eastons, because that's the kind of family they are. Honest." He paused for effect, a showman finding his mark. "This is my sister, Amanda. Uneducated. A failure. No real future to speak of. Proof that we don't all turn out the same, even from the same house." He let it land. He'd built the whole speech to deliver that line in front of these particular people. To use me, the before picture, to make his own climb look steeper. He even raised his glass a little, inviting them to toast the contrast. The laughter came. Not cruel exactly. Worse. Comfortable. The laughter of people who had no reason to doubt him and every reason to enjoy a confident man's joke. It rolled across the room like weather. And then, above all of it, one laugh rang out clear and pleased and unmistakable. My mother's. I want to describe that laugh. because it's the center of everything. It wasn't forced. It wasn't nervous. It was delighted. After 18 years with the daughter she hadn't spoken to standing right in front of her, the thing that brought my mother joy was the public confirmation that I was nothing. Her son had stood up and called me a failure in front of 60 strangers, and her response was happiness. I had braced for everything except how ordinary it would feel. 18 years, and it was the same kitchen table, the same verdict, the same wall. Why would your brother lie? I felt the old instinct rise, fold small, go quiet, survive. And for 1 second I almost obeyed it. For 1 second I was 14 again, and the safest thing in the world was to become smaller than the accusation. But I wasn't 14. I was a woman who held human hearts still and made them beat again. I had a card in my pocket from a man who'd staked his life on me and won. I didn't defend myself. I didn't cry. I didn't leave. I just looked. Past my brother, past my laughing mother, to the head table. Where Walter Easton was no longer laughing, where Walter Easton was no longer sitting. A chair scraped back across old wood. The sound cut through the laughter like a blade, and one by one the faces near the front began to turn, because when the oldest, most respected man in the room stands up, you stop, and you look. He didn't look angry. That's what I remember most. He looked the way he had in that hospital bed. Calm, certain, entirely unafraid of a room. He crossed the floor with a steadiness no one expects from a man his age, and he held out his hand, and a waiter, confused, gave him the microphone the band had been using. The band stopped playing. That's when the rest of the room understood that something was happening. A wedding band doesn't stop mid-song for nothing. Conversations died table by table, a wave of quiet rolling from the front of the room toward the back, until the only sound was Walter Easton's footsteps and the small electric hum of a live microphone. Walter? My mother's voice, uncertain now, the delight draining out of it. Mr. Easton, we didn't mean to. He raised one hand, not sharply, just enough. The room went quiet in a different way than before. Not the quiet of a punchline, the quiet of people who can feel the floor moving and don't yet know why. I saw Priscilla half rise from her seat, confused, looking from her grandfather to Nathaniel and back. I saw Lorraine, her mother, put a hand on the table. Walter Easton looked at my brother for exactly 1 second. Long enough for Nathaniel to start a smile, the reflexive smile of a man who assumes every important person in a room is on his side. Then Walter turned, fully, deliberately, away from Nathaniel, and he faced me. "Forgive me," he said into the microphone. "I'm surprised to see you here. A shame I didn't recognize you sooner." You could hear the ice settle in someone's glass. My brother's smile was still on his face, but it had stopped meaning anything. "I'm sorry," Nathaniel said, with a small laugh, trying to take the wheel back. "Walter, do you know my sister?" "Your sister," Walter said slowly, tasting the word. He turned back to the room, and he kept the microphone. 18 months ago, Walter said, my heart tried to kill me. The room didn't move, at the dinner table no less. Right in the middle of a sentence. He pressed his free hand flat to the center of his chest, over the place, and a few people who knew the story sucked in a breath. They told me I had a few hours. 3 of the vessels feeding my heart were closed. I needed surgery that night, and the surgeon who came to see me before they opened me up was a woman who looked, frankly, too young to be trusted with a houseplant. A nervous laugh. He didn't join it. "I told her I trusted her anyway," he said. "I don't know why. Something in her face. She told me 4 words. I'll take care of it. And then she opened my chest. And at one point, she told me this later, and the nurse confirmed it. My heart didn't want to start back up, and she didn't flinch. She brought me back." He turned again and pointed, and there was no mistaking the direction, because he was pointing at me. "That's her," Walter Easton said. "Dr. Dorsey, the cardiothoracic surgeon who saved my life." That was step 1 and step 2, lie and evidence, laid down side by side in front of 60 people. The lie had been spoken into the microphone 5 minutes earlier. Uneducated, a failure, no future. The evidence was an old man on his feet because of my hands. Step 3 came right on schedule. "There's a mistake," Nathaniel said, louder now, his voice climbing. "Walter, she's not a doctor. I think you've got her confused with someone. My sister didn't even finish." "I don't confuse the person who held my heart," Walter said. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. Brennan Memorial, October 2 years back. There was a nurse. Tall, red hair, Irish name. Bridget. She said, "Welcome back, Mr. Easton," when I woke up. He looked across the room at my mother. "Shall I keep going? I can describe the scar. I can tell you the name of every person in that room. I have spent 18 months being grateful by name." The stronger evidence. Step 4. Not a document. Better than a document. The unrepeatable detail only a man who'd lived it could know. You can forge a diploma. You cannot forge the specific memory of the person who restarted your heart. I watched it move through the room. The guests who'd laughed 30 seconds ago were doing a terrible math now, looking from the confident man at the microphone stand to the old patriarch who clearly was not confused, who was, in fact, the steadiest person in the room. A woman near me put her hand over her mouth. A man at the next table set down his drink very quietly, the way you do when you don't want to be the one who makes a sound. And then, from the head table, a woman stood. Lorraine, Priscilla's mother, Walter's daughter. Her face was white. "Dad's surgeon," she said, to the room, to her own family. I sat in that waiting room for 6 hours. They told us it might not work. And then a young woman in scrubs came out and told me he was going to live, and I never forgot her face. She looked at me, and recognition broke across her face like a slow dawn. "Dr. Dorsey. Oh my God, it's you. You're the one." That was the final reveal. Step 5. Not one voice but 3 now. Walter, the records he was naming, his own daughter, all pointing at the same impossible truth. That the failure with no future had her hands inside the chest of the guest of honor's grandfather and had brought him back from the edge. Then came the silence. Step 6. A real one. The kind that has weight. 60 people doing the same arithmetic at the same time and arriving, all together, at the gap between what my brother had just said and what was standing in front of them. Somewhere, a chair creaked. Nobody else moved. I had not said a single word. Nathaniel broke. Step 7. He always broke when the audience turned. He needed them too much to bear losing them. "This is ridiculous," he said, too loud, the charm gone ragged at the edges. Okay, fine, she's a nurse or whatever now. Good for her. But everyone here knows what she was. Mom, tell them. Tell them what she did. The school, the disgrace. Tell them what she really is." He turned to our mother for the wall that had always held. 18 years of why would your brother lie? He reached for it the way you reach for a railing in the dark, certain it will be there, because it had always been there. And every face in that room turned to Coralie Dorsey, waiting. My mother opened her mouth, and nothing came out. Because here is the thing about a lie that's lived in your mouth for 18 years. It works in private. It works at small dinners, among people who won't check, around tables where the accused isn't present. It does not work when the man it was used to bury is standing 6 feet away, alive, with a microphone, naming the nurse and the hospital and the month. And your own son has just demanded you repeat it in front of a room that already knows it's false. Nathaniel, she said finally, very quietly, off the microphone, but in a silent room everyone heard it. Stop. What? No. Mom, tell them, you were there. Stop it. Her voice cracked on the second word. Just stop. And that small broken surrender from the one person who'd always backed him, was louder than anything I could have shouted. He looked at her and understood. The way you understand a step that isn't there. That the floor he'd stood on his whole life had just been pulled out by the only person who'd ever held it up. The blood went out of his face. He looked, suddenly, like exactly what he was. A man who had never built anything, standing in a borrowed room, in front of a family he'd lied his way into, with no story left to tell. I finally spoke. One time, quietly. I never went to nursing school, Nathaniel, I said. You did. You're the one who was expelled. I just wasn't there to argue, so you gave it to me. I didn't have a document. I didn't need one. I had his face, doing in public what guilt does. And a mother who could not, this time, say the magic words. Why would your brother lie? Everyone in that room had just watched exactly why. If you've ever been the one a family decided to blame, the one who carried someone else's failure because you weren't in the room to defend yourself, I'd like to hear from you. Tell me below what it cost you and what set you free. I'd love to tell you there was a standing ovation. There wasn't. Real rooms don't clap when a family comes apart in front of them. They just go quiet, and they look at the floor, and they remember they have somewhere to be. Priscilla set down her glass. She looked at Nathaniel for a long moment, and then she looked at me. And then she walked over and did the only thing in that whole night that surprised me. Thank you, she said, for my grandfather. Her voice shook. I didn't know any of this. I need you to know I didn't know any of it. I believe you, I said. And I did. She didn't end it that night. Not out loud. But I watched her step back from my brother, just slightly. The way you step back from a stove you've just learned is hot. I heard later from Janelle that the engagement was quietly called off within the month. Not with a scene, with a phone call and a returned ring. Priscilla's family does things without shouting. It's a kind of mercy and a kind of verdict at once. My mother didn't speak to me before I left. She sat down at the head table and looked at her hands. 18 years of being right, gone in 8 minutes, and no script left for what comes after. I don't think she's found one yet. Nathaniel tried to follow me to the car. He had his charm back online by then, the way he always recovered. Mandy, he said. Amanda, come on. We're family. You're not really going to... I stopped at my car door and turned around. I'm a surgeon, I said. I spend my days holding people's hearts in my hands and trying to keep them alive. I'm very good at it. I opened the door. I have no future. You said it yourself. So I'm going to go live in it. I drove home with the radio off. Walter Easton sends 2 cards now, every year, around the date of the surgery. One to the unit, the way he always has, and one to me. Same handwriting, same line, still spending the time you gave me. Walter, people ask if I forgave them. I didn't, and I won't. And I've stopped feeling like I owe anyone an apology for that. Forgiveness isn't the price of healing. Distance is. I kept the card. I gave back the story. I had carried a failure that was never mine for 18 years. The night I finally set it down, it turned out to weigh exactly nothing at all.